What's the typical process to access the member variables and member functions of a class? We access them by creating an object of the class. But what if you simply want to access the members of a class, be it a variable or a function, without creating the object? Is it possible to create a member that can be used by itself without reference to a specific object of the class? Yes, it is possible, and in order to do that, you will have to precede its declaration with the keyword static. That's the whole purpose of the static keyword, allowing certain members of the class to exist, referenced, and accessed without class object. Now, one can ask, if we don't access the static members with a class object, then how do we access them? We access static members directly with the class name. Just put the class name, dot operator, and access the static member. So when a member is declared static, it can be accessed before any object of its class are created and without reference to any object. We can declare both methods and variables to be static. The most common example before us of a static member is the main method itself. Public static void main. Main is declared as static because it must be called by the JVM and the different objects of the JVM architecture when your program begins. Outside the class, to use a static member, we need to only specify the name of its class followed by the dot operator. No object needs to be created. That's the key thing about the static keyword. Now let's talk about the static variables first. Variables declared as static are essentially the global variables. Why they are global? Because when an object is declared, no copy of a static variable is made. Instead, all instances of the class share the same static variable. Oracle's official spec says that if a field, a variable is declared static, there exists exactly one incarnation of the field, no matter how many instances the objects of the class may eventually be created. A static field, sometimes called a class variable, is incarnated when the class is initialized. And a field or variable that is not declared static, sometimes called a non static field, is called an instance variable. So, whenever a new object of a class is created, a new variable associated with that instance is created for every instance variable declared in that class or any of its superclasses. But that's not the case with the static variable. For all the instances of a class, the same copy of the static variable exists and they all access, works, and manipulates the same copy of the static variable. Similar to static variable, we can create the static methods as well. The difference between a static method and a normal method is that the static method is called through its class name without any object of that class being created. So method declared as static have several restrictions as well. They can directly call only other static methods in their class. They can directly access only static variables in their class. They cannot access the non static variables. And they do not have a this reference. So, the difference between a static method and a normal method is this: they call by the class name without the object being created, and then they can only call the other static methods or variable from the class. They are not allowed to access the non static things. But other than the static variables and static methods, we have the static blocks as well. Sometimes a class will require some type of initialization before it is ready to create objects. For example, it might need to establish a connection to a remote site. It also might need to initialize certain static variables before any of the class static methods are used. To handle these type of situation, Java allows you to declare a static block. It's a block with the word static that only begins and ends. That's it. So a static block is executed when the class is first loaded. It is executed before the class can be used for any other purpose. So if you want to perform any kind of pre-processing task, if there are certain tasks that needs to be performed before the class can be used, class can be initialized, we can put those tasks inside the static block. Just put the static keyword, begin the block and close the block and put whatever you want to do inside that block. So that's all for the static keyword in Java. In the next part, we will discuss a design pattern which is related directly to the static keyword, and that is the singleton design pattern, a very crucial design pattern for all the Java developers out there. We'll cover that in the next part.